Welcome to Bullies, Wimps, and Poverty Pimps, a bi-weekly podcast with me, Dr. Kish Price.
So today, talking about poverty pimps. And of course, talked a lot about bullies, and we will get into wimps, but I thought it would be better for us to frame poverty pimps and get a better sense of what we're talking about in this particular podcast before addressing the wimps, because this is all a part of the system that's in place. So when we talk about poverty pimps here on this podcast, we are talking about a phenomenon that has been used in times past to describe the people who serve as intermediaries between the people that they're supposed to be advocating for and funders, whether that's government, private funders. It really doesn't matter, foundations. There are people who are, delegated or have delegated themselves to stand in the gap. Now, the reason why this term has been confusing for some is that it has also been used to inappropriately label those who actually are advocating on behalf of the populations that they're supposed to be representing and have done so in good form. So it makes it very tricky, dicey, if you will, for you to use the term and not really know, well, what are we talking about here? Are we talking about the people who are actually doing harm, or are we talking about the people who are being labeled as such that are actually doing good? Well, I'm going to make it even murkier. What about the people who look like they're doing good? Anybody looking from outside would say they're doing good. They're actually helping the populations that they're saying they're supposed to be helping. So we don't see an issue here. Well, that happens too. And so we're obviously addressing the black, the white, and the gray here. And just to get us started, I want to share an example of this that I personally witnessed, in which a very established organization led by a man who claimed to be all about the people. And when I say all about the people, his organization was specifically to support the Black and Brown communities in the city. This is a Caucasian man, white man, who had, I think, operated under this banner for so long that if you hadn't had any close interactions with him, you would not know that there was this element of poverty pimping happening. And as I said before, in explaining what that actually means, the element that I think is most detrimental is the deception. Labeling yourself as someone who's standing in the gap and helping when it's so necessary and needed, but you're actually trying to benefit personally and only personally. You really don't care about the bigger picture. And I will say, I've witnessed this in multiple spaces, but in this particular instance, I had a conversation that was very enlightening, that allowed me to realize where he stood. And this was around the time when there was a lot of, I'm trying to be careful here about not labeling the person or calling out the person specifically. I'm labeling his actions as poverty pimping from my perspective. Okay. So and this is just to help you to understand what it could look like. So if you're saying that you're advocating for Black and brown children and you're trying to help those who have been just as involved youth. And I share a story with you about how during the time in which there was clear indications of why Black people should be concerned about being stopped by police officers and specifically young Black men. This is around the time, after Trayvon Martin was killed. And I say that I had concerns about this, and I'm sharing my stories about, my sons and having an officer actually coming to help us because we were in trouble, had some roadside assistance that we needed. And this was a friendly officer. He's coming to help. But because my sons had been exposed to what had happened, we talked about it. They'd seen it on the news. They bristled. They were literally like by my side, and I could tell it was fear there, right? Because they're like, oh my gosh, like, what's going to happen? Are we in trouble? And I'm going to say, sure, I think most people have some kind of reaction if an officer comes and you're not sure if you're being pulled over for this or that or whatever. But it's absolutely different when you have a young Black child who has seen and been exposed to the facts that young Black men are being killed by police with no justification. And so I shared that with this individual that it happened. I wasn't given any credence to political stance or anything. I literally just said, giving, context to what happened. Yeah, my boys were really scared because of what had happened and blah, blah, blah. And he laughed and said, oh my gosh, like, I cannot believe you can't tell me that that's what they were thinking. And I mean, literally went into this whole soliloquy about how ridiculous it was that my sons felt that way and that I felt how I felt, and discredited and invalidated our feelings completely. And I hadn't, I don't know. I guess I somewhat dismissed some of the signs because, he was just a kind of a loose cannon anyway. But because he was so, established in the work that he was doing, and I hadn't had any indicators, I hadn't heard any you peoples or anything like that, and hadn't really heard, I didn't know anybody who knew him, to be honest. So that should have been a red flag. But anyway, that led me to realize, and there were more incidents that occurred after that. That was like the first thing that was, to me, it was like, okay, we have a problem here. And this is somebody that I was, contracting with. And so I just, that was my first experience with understanding just how you can have someone who's standing in the gap, somebody who's been receiving funding from, the government, from these private donors and school system even, and assume that they're doing good work. And I'm saying that with air quotes. That is troubling and disturbing, right? If you understand the motives behind what people are doing, even though it may be hidden in good work, but the motives are off. Like, you don't even understand and you can't even relate to or be empathetic with the people that you're serving. And I'm saying that with air quotes as well. That is disturbing. And so after that experience, it really heightened my antennae, if you will, about the whole white savior complex. And I know we have listeners all over the globe. So to clarify, here in America, where I am in the US, there is a tendency for those that are not of the minoritized population to try to save the day, and there are so many issues with that. And that, term was coined years ago, but there are issues with that, right? Because you come in with a preconceived notion that you know what's best, that you know how to solve the problems that, these people are dealing with, and not even understanding your contributions to what they're dealing with. and and a complete disregard to how they feel, what they're okay, here let me back up a little bit. When we talk about problems, societal problems, those problems aren't created by the people who are being abused by them. Those problems were created intentionally to abuse the people that are receiving that abuse, right? And so to come in and act like, well, let me help you out is completely ignorant. It's completely ignorant. It is disrespectful. It is frustrating and annoying to be on the other side of that and receive that kind of treatment. And that is what we see within this poverty pimping system, is this element of hierarchy, or I guess extension of colonialism, right? Where there's this, I know better, I have more resources, let me help you. And we talk about this, the difference between a hand out and a hand up. And the white savior complex comes with attached with the handouts, right? It comes attached with, I still need you to be dependent upon me. I cannot hide in the background in whatever I'm doing. I need to be seen. I need you to know that I did what I did, and I need to receive credit for it. That is the mentality of a poverty pimp. And in so doing, it is a way of kind of operating under this philanthropic umbrella where, look at the good that I'm doing and look at how we're doing it. But you have completely discredited, completely ignored the very people that you're supposed to be supporting. And I think this is good ground to just frame up all of this. So, we've talked about the motives and not being completely disconnected. We've talked about the desire to be seen and to receive credit. And then the third phase of this is the groups that actually are managed by people who look like the people they're supposed to be supporting. And there's almost an assumption that those people are actually working for the good of those that they're representing, because why wouldn't you be? You are of them, right? And this is where the phrase about all skin folk and kinfolk comes from, right? Because there's this element of representation, false representation, misrepresentation that happens where you're in the room and where you should be speaking out as an advocate or representative of, and a liaison between the people you're advocating for and this entity or group or organization that you are a part of. Instead, you have developed a personality or a stance or philosophy that is very congruent with the norm, with the majority. So now you're no longer representing the minoritized population. You're not representing the marginalized because you want to be front and center. You want to be included. You don't want to be an outcast. You want to be liked. You want to be loved in this space. And in order for you to properly advocate for those who are marginalized and minoritized, you have to own who you are there for, whether you have the same skin for that group or not. And that is a problem in this poverty pimping system that keeps it going, right? So we talked about, I just wanted to frame up these three phases or three types, I guess I'll say, of poverty pimping that you see. And we are going to dig deeper into this in episodes to come. But I just wanted to give that frame of just what we're going to be talking about, why it matters, and um, how we can fight against it. And I promise that the next episode is coming soon. I just thought it would be helpful to go ahead and frame this up so that when we start breaking this down, you have a better sense of what we're talking about and why we're talking about it in this way. So we're talking about those who are advocating for a particular group who absolutely don't relate, but have found a way to financially benefit from this false representation. We're talking about those who pretend to be supportive, but it's really about the accolades and the desire to be the savior, right? Then we're talking about the group of those who are obviously seen as being advocates because they're a part of that group, yet they are not advocating properly for those that they are representing. And the other level to that is potentially benefiting in ways that would cause everybody to scratch their heads, whether that's personal benefits financially, whether that's not properly managing what's coming in so that they can properly serve the community. It's all of that. And so we're going to frame up the first one in our next episode, talking about these poverty pimps and the variations of them. Thank you so much for your support. Thank you for listening. And I look forward to breaking this down with you all in our next episode. In the meantime, be bold, be courageous, be unpimped.